Hello everyone, welcome to episode 23 of the Time Talks podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network. I recently had the opportunity to speak to the one and only Andy Hurley, an activist, revolutionary, vegan straight edge, and drummer known for his bands Sect, Race Trader, The Damn Things, and Fall Out Boy. He's collabed with everyone from Neckbeard Death Camp to Jay-Z to Black Thought to the Neptunes and Debbie Harry. He's the owner of a vegan coffee shop called Oracle in Portland that gives its employees healthcare and is still paying his employees through the pandemic, which is awesome. Besides our love for coffee, we talked about comics, mutual aid, anarchism, hardcore, veganism, straight edge, and Fall Out Boy. Big thanks to Awareness for the Music. Here's a jingle from a fellow Channel Zero Network member.
COVID-19 has exposed the many failings of states around the globe. Millions have lost their jobs, leaving many unable to pay rent and in danger of eviction. In response, tenants around the world organized rent strikes for April 1. As the crisis continues, even more people will fall short of rent. More rent strikes will begin May 1 and maybe even June 1. If you're worried about making rent now or in the future, it's time to get organized. Reach out to your neighbors, find your local tenants union, and let the landlords know you won't be paying rent. Then fly a white sheet from your window to spread the message. Channel Zero Network podcasts have put out several episodes on tenant struggles surrounding COVID-19. Check out Rebel Steps' emergency rent strike episode for ways to get started. It's Going Down's episode This is America, number 111 and 112 for interviews with organizers, and the Final Straws episode, Doing for Selves, to hear from Tenants United in Chicago, and Crime Thinks, the Ex-Worker podcast, episode 75, for an overview of rent strike tactics and history. Even though we don't know what the future holds, we do know that stronger communities are the way to ensure a better world for all of us. We can build those communities one person at a time, building by building, block by block. Be ready to join the movement on May 1.
Well, I want to start off by talking about comic books and graphic novels.
Nice.
And like my three favorite writers, it changes, but I love Warren Ellis, Alan Moore, and then Grant Morrison. He's usually up there in my top three, but really Warren Ellis and Alan Moore. And I love Transmetropolitan. It's probably my number one.
Yep.
And I was wondering, like, where you're coming from with comic books. I know you're a fan, and graphic novels.
Yeah, I would have the same three, so I'm right there with you. I think Alan Moore obviously changed my life and just writes from a place where you feel like you're unlocking the secrets of the universe. Yeah. And I feel like that's the first place. I mean, I've had that with a lot of books I've read, but Alan Moore just does that in a way that is beyond anyone else's capability, it seems like. And obviously his politics are like spot on. He's an anarchist. He's like, seems like a really cool dude. And then Warren Ellis, like Transmet for me as well, and Planetary. Both were huge to me growing up and reading comics. And then I think Grant Morrison is similar to Alan Moore, just in obviously being like into magic, even, albeit a different form of magic, but he still explores insane perspectives of the universe. And I feel like his writing comes off sometimes like he's on an acid trip and he's like giving you half the story because the rest of it's in his head and he forgot to write it down. But he always like pushes the envelope, which is cool. And what I like in art.
Yeah, and well, the one thing that really drew me in with Grant Morrison, because I feel like we're similar, we really like political based graphic novels, is when I was reading The Invisibles. Yeah. And Grant Morrison has this teacher who's talking about Kropotkin right off the bat. I think it was in like the first one. I was like, this is crazy. Like, the only other person I really know references anarchism a lot is Alan Moore or Warren Ellis.
Yeah,
I don't know if Warren Ellis is, but I always feel like he has that bend to him.
I think he is or was a socialist of some persuasion, which
okay.
I'll take it.
So I wanted to kind of talk about maybe like your upbringing, but also kind of how art and all this stuff collided and started to break this spectacle of what society was, because we have everything we're given. So when I was in elementary school, we would like write letters on the Mayflower, back to our home, or we would be writing from Christopher Columbus's ship or something like this, and these were all settler histories that were like baked into our education.
Yep.
I was wondering, like, with your upbringing, when was it that you started to say like something's not right, or there's something deeper going on here?
I mean, I think I always felt uneasiness with things, but it was definitely music for me, with Rage Against the Machine being the obvious answer when I was really young, to just be this mainstream force that kind of introduced me to a lot of that. And then getting into punk and hardcore to kind of take it to another level with, Propaganda and I guess Earth Crisis in terms of being vegan and straight edge. And then just a lot of other, weird particular bands like Struggle, and I'm drawing a blank now. And then obviously a lot of hip hop as well. Public Enemy, Paris, to get into like, that side of the thing, Dead Prez later. But yeah, music is definitely was my in to kind of questioning the narrative that, as you said, we learn, every day in school growing up.
Your first, like, what got you into hardcore was Helmet and Biohazard, and then it led into more radical things like Earth Crisis, who had like these awesome lyrics of like liberation and straight edge, and like their song from Destroy All Machines, Fortress, which was talking about being straight edge as well, like I won't have any poisons in my body, like from the system and all that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I kind of have an addictive personality, and maybe addiction, genetically. So that's something I was really young, but I struggled with it. My dad died when I was 5, and doing stuff kind of really hurt my relationship with my mom, which has always been really close. So getting into hardcore gave me something to want to not do that, because I just don't know if I didn't find straight edge like what my path would have been, because my brain just goes to extremes in anything I'm into, or whatever. So I think that kind of saved me. But yeah, I've always had a predilection towards things about liberation or justice, or questioning the narrative that we've been taught from day one.
That's awesome. I feel like I was like in a similar situation growing up, to where I saw a lot of my family on my mom's side die of addiction. I come from like a predominantly Irish German background, and she was always telling me growing up, like, don't ever touch alcohol, don't even try it till you're older, because it's killed most of our family. It runs in our genes. And that always kind of scared me. And then I think it was coupled with music. Predominantly my education with politics and thinking outside was music, and hip hop music in particular. And like you said, I was super into Dead Prez and Talib Kweli and Mos Def, and then I was hanging out with hip hop people, and they weren't like, there wasn't like a straight edge scene, but a lot of hip hop people were very particular about their diet, and they were anti-cigarettes because they said that gives money to the government, gives money to the corporations to make bombs and attack Palestine and these things. And yeah, I kind of feel like I found my way into this straight edge scene at an early age, but I was kind of alienating in hip hop, and that's kind of what led me to hardcore. And I wanted to ask you about a lot of these things. Like your first band was Global Scam,
Yeah.
and then when you met. Oh, I want to move back real quick to your mom, because one of my favorite stories about your mom is when you all were practicing and the neighbor complained, and your mom like told the neighbor like just to fuck off so you guys can keep practicing. That's so cool, man. I love that story.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. That was awesome.
And so when you met Pete, he was vegan and straight edge too at that time.
Yep.
But all these things that you were kind of into were these small subcultures, and I feel like subcultures have this solidarity to them. And I was wondering if you could speak to that and how that kind of relates to your interest in anarchism and mutual aid and solidarity, and how these things kind of work together to create culture.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, we're obviously a communal species that needs, communities and partnership with other people and other animals and, the wild to survive. Obviously, cities and, these artificial structures have really had a huge effect on our brain chemistry and on our happiness and finding reasons to live, and I think that's something I always felt as a kid, especially, having my dad die when I was 5, and I have 5 half brothers, 4 half sisters that I just never had a relationship with for lots of different reasons. And I think that really affected me. So I always found my community and my family in, these subcultures like punk and hardcore and straight edge and veganism, and then, politics and different things like that, like, different movements and activism scenes. And it's such a foundational building block to what makes us human, that, we need each other. And, you can see it at work now with this quarantine and lockdown where, it is traumatic for everyone. We're all dealing with it in different ways. Just being cut off from the people we love. And it's difficult. And, it really shows how important that stuff is. And then on the flip side, we're seeing people come together in new and different ways to deal with this and help people out who need it. Whether it's going around your neighborhood and letting people, maybe some of the more affected groups, older people and disabled people who need help getting groceries or whatever, like people are figuring out ways to help each other out, even in the face of an unprecedented situation, where we're all kind of stuck inside. So I think that's, it just shows how important that is, how important solidarity is.
Yeah, that's a deep answer. And I was seeing that too. Well, like on one fold, I was thinking about, and I've seen a report about this on domestic violence and how a lot of people who are survivors are now stuck in homes with their abusers. Yeah. And like these microcosms. And so like when you're looking at sociology and then you're thinking about people who already have anxiety and now they're stuck in a house. But then to the flip side, like you were saying, you familiar with Scott Crow and like Common Ground? After Hurricane Katrina, the organization they started up.
A little bit, not a ton. I've heard of it.
So it was one of the largest like modern anarchist organizations that started after Hurricane Katrina, and it was kind of like a decentralized group. They started up a clinic in Algiers, New Orleans, and they were doing self-defense. They were doing legal clinics, and they started just helping people because all infrastructure broke down in New Orleans. And I was seeing these solidarity networks, like in Denver, we have the Front Range Mutual Aid group that is doing what you're saying, checking on neighbors, and people can sign up. And it was crazy because I had neighbors in our neighborhood who were just some people, regular average people, and who were going around leaving their cell phone numbers saying, if you're an older generation person, please text me and I'll bring you what you need. And it was cool because that's all really mutual aid is at that point.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I want to bounce into, we've already touched on this a little bit, but music and politics. Like, how much did this radicalize you? Or do you think it has the potential? Do you think it has the duty to radicalize? And how did music radicalize you?
I mean, I personally feel a duty to be radical and talk about that stuff, mm-hmm. because I know about it, and it's obviously, extremely important because we're running out of time. But that being said, I don't know that art has a duty. I mean, I think any art is political, whether it intends to be or not. It's saying something. And I think about it like it shouldn't have to be political. It's just a byproduct of the shitty world that we live in, that it should have to be or has to be, which is really unfair. That, there's a propaganda line that's like, I shouldn't have to, talking about being a kid, I shouldn't have to worry about this kind of shit.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me, that kids and people shouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, most people, at least in America, so-called United States, don't really care about politics. And that sucks because, kind of prevents real solidarity, except, well, that's not true. Now that I say that, thinking about situations like this, or like you were saying, Hurricane Katrina, mm-hmm. you see that in those situations, people come together regardless. Like, I think people inherently do have that drive towards solidarity, mutual aid, and taking care of each other. But culturally, hegemonically, like, we're so individualized and atomized that, I don't know. It's just, I don't think art should have to be. I think but that's just my wish for a better world where this kind of stuff isn't stuff we have to think about. People shouldn't have to worry about this, but this is what's been forced on all of us and the world. And like I said, I feel like it is my duty to bring attention to that. And I mean, that's kind of my role, I feel like, as a musician is, I guess my main band isn't overtly political, all personally political, and, it seeps out, especially for me. I talk about it a lot, but I do a lot of, other projects that are overtly political, and that's really important to me to be able to talk about that stuff.
Race Trader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason for doing this personally.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And yeah, I guess that question is kind of tricky because, like, I believe, like you said, all art is political, but how can we actually define what is political? And as artists, we don't always have as much control as we think we do. So you may think you're writing like this manifesto that's going to change the world, and like it doesn't hit, but like a track that may not be overtly political could actually make someone think deeper and open up a critique in their own life or save a life,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's an interesting perspective, because I think for me, I do look for the manifestos, but I think most people listen to music who are into lyrics and pay attention to that stuff are looking for stories that personally affect them in some way. And if it's not overtly about one thing or another, like, it can be a story that kind of just makes you see a different perspective about something,
Yeah. Or like, I mean, even like, I consider Fall Out Boy to have a politicalness to them, because they talk about alienation, they talk about loneliness, talk about depression. And,
that's true.
Speaking to that alienation is something that actually saves lives. And that's what politics should be all about, is is rescuing people from this capitalist system that puts us into these pits of despair. That's a beautiful thing, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's kind of that is kind of the major current in football is kind of reaching out to. I mean, obviously, I think we understand we're tapping into a younger group, and having been through that, that's kind of the major thing you struggle with at that time is alienation and feeling like a misfit that has no home and has no place. And I think that's definitely the major current in that band is kind of reaching out to those people to let them know that you have a place and you have a home, and more importantly than that, you have a voice. And like whether it's doing your own band or art, whatever art, writing, making, drawing, doing comics, whatever, like do it, because hopefully there'll be more people reaching out to more people to make something bigger that can bring this capitalist shape down. I mean, my hope is after this world historical event that we're going through, that we see something better on the other side, because the reality is going to be different. There's no normalcy to go back to, quote unquote normal, whatever that is. Like, I just hope that this brings about something better.
Yeah. When people talk about going back to normal, I think that's a good critique to open. Like, well, our normal was just coming out of a failed COP conference of environmental collapse. Pretty much everyone not being able to agree that that's something we need to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely a new epoch. Like you had post 9/11, it's going to be like post COVID.
Totally.
And then other people have been talking about like, well, you think COVID was bad? Wait until climate change actually takes full force, even though it's been killing people, primarily people of color and
the global south.
Yeah,
definitely
it's been going on for 10, 15 years already.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's a good point. Like, this is kind of a preview of what's to come with when climate change fully hits us. Like the disruptions to the supply chain, the disruptions to the economy, that's stuff that that this system can't, weasel its way out of. Like, there's no escaping that. And this, I think and hope, I mean, maybe I just see it that way and friends of mine see it that way because, we're looking for that. But it does seem like most people are seeing capitalism for what it is. Like, they're seeing the cracks in the pavement, I guess, and that there's something better that we could come up with underneath with mutual aid networks and stuff like that, that this system isn't here to help us. Like that's being made clear every day. Like, every response that this system is having is clear that they're not worried about people. They're not worried about life.
Yeah.
So hopefully.
Yeah. And I really think that's a big a wake up call from anarchism is there's no one here to save us but us. And our networks, which are always being broken up by capitalism and work days, debt, being in debt slavery, those are really what break up our communities. And these are times to reflect and come together. And everyone's on board with that when things go down,
Totally.
And going back to lyrics, I'm also kind of like a manifesto type person. And when I was in high school, that's when 9/11 hit. And I was listening to Dead Prez and Kweli. And Kweli had released a song about 9/11 mixed in with police brutality and Timothy McVeigh, song called The Proud. When we got a tour with Kweli last year, I actually was able to tell him, like, dude, that song saved my life, man. Because I was in high school and they were trying to draft us every day. And your song just spoke to me because I was so lonely at the time. I didn't know. I just had recruiters taking me out to lunch. And it was it was hip hop that was like my mentor and speaking to me. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about music and art.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a helping hand in times like that are really dark and confusing, and you have all sorts of different narratives, vying for your attention. And I think a time like that, I knew a few, not a lot, but I knew a few people who were previously political who kind of went off the deep end because of it and just went, super reactionary. And, you can see at a time like that there's an easy narrative for, the system to kind of push to be like, see, like things are bad. You got to work with us to change this. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, for me as well, like music definitely reaches out in times like those.
Yeah, and I always think about rural communities too, of how important that is, or even podcasts. Like a podcast could be your only network of mentors if you're out in, the middle of Kansas or something. And that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, for sure, I think podcasts are kind of a big thing for that. And it's, I'm glad you're doing this.
Oh, thank you, man. It all came together because I've been friends with Soul for a long time, Tim, and he had started up really one of the first leftist political podcasts, I think, the Soulcast. It was him and Crime Think, and he lived in Denver at the time too, and I was like, this is awesome. And I was always a journalist recording calls and interviewing people, and then I was like, I should just record these calls and release them, and boom.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
Along with our admiration for Warren Ellis and Alan Moore, we also share another Venn diagram collide. So you studied history and anthropology, and I was a history major too, and I taught history. So I wanted to ask you about your study into history. What was your kind of focus? And I know you dropped out of college, so you went all in on music, but kind of what that journey was like.
Yeah, I think, like a lot of hardcore kids at that time, I think Ishmael kind of spoke to a lot of us to wake us up about a lot of things with civilization.
That's the book by Daniel Quinn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. As a force that's kind of, I guess maybe the beginning of the domestication process, in my opinion, is with civilization. And, domestication obviously is the prime directive, if you will. And capitalism is obviously the end stage of that, of domesticating everything and everyone on the planet. And so that's how I got into history and more importantly to me, anthropology, getting into writers like Paul Shepard and let me look. I'm in my office, which has my library as well.
Oh, nice.
Marvin Harris. Yeah. Marvin Harris had a lot of stuff that was really pivotal to me coming up, just about, like humanity lived a myriad of different ways for, 99% of our time on this planet. And then a mere blip of our time on this planet has been this one way that's torpedoed us to, climate collapse and taking, this planet and all life on this planet hostage and kind of, just destroying everything. And I think that's what got me into anthropology and just looking at, our origins as a species and compared to what we have now and just how against the grain to what we're kind of, what's in our DNA.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's cool about Ishmael because that's where the gorilla is talking about the leavers and the takers.
Yeah.
Right. That's so cool that led into and interesting about history and anthropology because I feel like if there was a battle rap between degrees, it's always the anthropologists and the historians going at each other. Yeah. I'd have my students write battle raps as historians or anthropologists in class, and
that's
awesome. Funny. So I guess on that topic, I wanted to talk about anarcho-primitivism and kind of how that fits into it and as a critique, and just kind of a discussion on that.
Okay.
So where do you see like a good balance would be for that, or how maybe your ideas that you've read about this based on anarcho-primitivism, like what is your interest in it, or how do you see some actions that could be taken that would be beneficial and fit into this anarchist milieu?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I mean, being into Vegan Straight Edge and Earth Crisis and bands that, bring up a more ecological approach and that aspect to things. And then, obviously being introduced to like Earth First and Animal Liberation Front and Earth Liberation Front and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think that was kind of, and then, Ishmael and a lot of like hardcore kids back then got into that, and then into deeper and deeper things from there, because that's kind of a very basic introduction to that stuff. Ishmael is. I think anarcho-primitivism kind of spoke to that and is a critique that is talking about things I've kind of touched on, like civilization and domestication and the alienations of this way of life that's based on dominion and kind of control. It kind of spoke to me because it was a deeper thing than just capitalism. Uh-huh. And looking back and seeing that a lot of this stuff kind of took place a little further back than just the advent of capitalism. But that being said, I think I've had a lot of questions myself, kind of re-exploring like where I'm at on the scale with that. I think for me it's still an important critique, but there's obviously now we're seeing a lot of different, I guess there could be, and for some people there is a strain of like eco-fascism that seems like it's a part of it. Yeah. And is a part of it with some people that I obviously don't agree with, and maybe kind of pushed back a little from it because of that. But I think to me it's still a really important critique because it takes into consideration this deeper drive towards with domestication and where that all begins, which I think would be the key prime directive. Like I said, is domestication and that process and what we're missing, that kind of as cities build and hierarchies like spring out of the initial seed of civilization, and stratification of wealth and class and things like that. That's where that critique kind of speaks to me. As to like what can be done about it, I just don't know. I don't know that there's too much to do that doesn't kind of come with, that isn't a little on the eco-fascist side of doing fucked up shit to bring about a collapse, which I don't agree with. So I don't know. I kind of, that's a greater critique I have for things personally. But I think anarchism is the thing that spoke to me most above a lot of other leftist or post-leftist things because of its adaptability. It's not this dogmatic thing where you have to have, a party and a cadre and you follow this, Bible by yeah, exactly. Like the fact that it's adaptable and it's about, like we've been talking about for most of this conversation, mutual aid. It's about the local context you're in and dealing with that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I've come to now. I mean, it's always been a weird thing for me because of, my band getting popular and getting to where it did, and that kind of going against an anarcho-primitivist or just an anarchist critique in some ways, and me doing whatever I can to kind of fight that and use this platform to spread that message or, that critique far and wide and to engage with other people about their perspectives on it.
Well, no, I think those are all these are all ideas that coalesce. I mean, if what your band is and them being big, that's a platform at that point. And I see things like anarcho-primitivism and critiques as tools in a toolbox. So
absolutely, yeah.
So you have a platform and you're able to throw this tool out there, which is a critique, to think about things. I mean, if some band had a neon fracking well with their name on it, yeah, then that becomes counterintuitive to me, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
But a platform is a different thing. And yeah, when I first learned about anarcho-primitivism, I feel like the whole point you're talking about, which is anthropological, is husbandry, domestication, and agriculture. And also this all leads into domination of environment, domination of animals. And I think that's the core foundation of anarchism. Or looking at Bell Hooks, what she says of feminism, core feminism should be just anti-domination as a whole. So I think those things all kind of fit in. And I always have this debate, and me and Soul we always get into this debate. But on one end I see anarcho-primitivism. Why do we need Pepsi? Why do we have gallons of water, trillions of gallons of water with Pepsi,
Yeah.
It's something that gives its diabetes, other things. But if you go down that route, you can get into dominating thing of also telling other people other things. But you do need to have lines. But as far as the debate, I always get into this with primitivism and then sci-fi anarchism.
Yeah.
And so I'm a fan of Transmetropolitan. You can obviously see that society wasn't doing so well, but it falls into this futurism. And I always I'm down with primitivism, but I really hope that technology could solve these things and we could have some type of free energy and better life. And that comes from reading Ursula Le Guin, Ian Banks, Kim Stanley Robinson, and these kind of futurists.
Totally. Yep.
So where do you fall in line with those thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I love all those writers. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. When I was super into a lot of anarcho-primitivist thought and critique, I really struggled with the nuts and bolts of it, I guess. Wilding and stuff like that is important. I think maybe to go back to your question, what can you do? I guess rewilding is a thing you can do. It's more of a personal thing, or a thing you could do with friends, or build a community on that, of just small projects of rewilding. Personally, I read a thing the other day about mushroom foraging, mushroom hunting. Just as a small thing to kind of learn the ecosystems you're involved in, and the biospheres that are in your local area, and kind of how to read those things, and then eventually get to a place where you're almost in communication with it all, and see yourself as the piece of a bigger puzzle, instead of the way most people see themselves now, that we're the rulers of the land that we live on, or our property or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's something I struggled with too, is that, loving comic books, and, the way that works for me being someone who tours a lot, is to have an iPad and have most of my stuff on there, because I can't bring, I used to actually pack a suitcase full of books for tours, and I never read them all. So it'd be such a waste. But, I get through one, maybe two books. I'm a really slow reader, especially on tour, where there's so many things vying for your attention. Mm-hmm. And I kind of have a little ADD, I guess, where I kind of have a hard time focusing. And I think especially that's one, I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place right now, but that's one place where Kevin Tucker, who's a friend of mine who does Black and Green Review, which I think is, one of the crucial anarcho-primitivist journals, kind of is recently been going with primal anarchism, which I think, obviously primitive has a lot of connotations that aren't great. So I think that's a really good term that I kind of embrace too. So I've kind of struggled with that with primal anarchism too, where I have an iPad, I have a laptop, and I do see how I've actually been rereading the Black and Green Review, I'm going through them again. And in the first one, Kevin Tucker's essay called, I think, Suffocating Void. Let me look. Yeah, the Suffocating Void is talking about social networking and how that changes our brain chemistry and the way we relate to the world. And it's true, and I can see how it's true, and I can see how I've lost focus for reading over long periods of time nowadays, because the way social media and the internet and all of that works it's gratification, and there's so many different things vying for our attention, and that's difficult, and that's changed the way we relate to the world and to each other. And I can see that, I can feel that. And so that is this thing I struggle with, like my addiction to those things, technology and whatnot. But at the same time, I agree with what you're saying, that it's here, we have it. And I definitely, there's a case to be made that technology itself is just bad, and from its genetic makeup, if you will, or in its DNA, it's just there as a domesticating tool. But I do definitely think that capitalism, being the progenitor a lot of all of this stuff, is affecting things in a way that if we, you can see that when anarchists take these tools and use them in new and creative ways. Like I just listened to an It's Going Down interview with a doctor talking about the COVID crisis, and he is part of a collective that has like DIY medicines and stuff like that, and diabetes treatments and stuff like that. And that's all stuff that technology and tools like that can be used for. And I, like I said, I think we kind of have to respond to the reality we're in. And that's what's attractive to me about anarchism. And therefore, I totally agree with you that it's not, space anarcho-communism or nothing. And it's not going back to, it's not going back to like our hunter-gatherer past or nothing. It's an in-between. It's like finding a way through the reality as it is now with the tools we have at hand, and liberating those tools from the venture capitalists and Silicon Valley, and using them, like I said, in new and creative ways to do things that they maybe weren't intended for, which is sucking capital from the world. I think that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, definitely.
In my estimation. And then hopefully we can all figure out in our different localities, like different ways that we, rewild in ways, and then ways that we use the tools at hand to kind of make things better as they are, and free, again, going back to this, world historical situation we're in now, like hopefully on the other side of this, sorry, I'm like, my brain is like running out of steam. I need more coffee. We can all we can all figure out ways to continue the mutual aid projects that regular normal people are a part of, because this is a time where people get to see anarchists doing the things they do, which is helping people. And so hopefully, they see it in a non-politicized way. They just see the results of it, and we can build a better world off of that.
Definitely. And shout out to What's Going Down. They're part of Channel Zero Network with this podcast too. And I love Dave and the work they do.
Yeah, definitely.
And speaking about rewilding, that was getting back in touch with working with the land, like you said, and also the benefits of it. One thing Common Ground did after Hurricane Katrina was they planted sunflowers everywhere, because sunflowers actually take lead and toxins out of the soil. And that was something that I learned from their bioremediation projects. That was really cool.
Dang, that's awesome. And that's a way you can kind of, use that in a specific context that can help that situation.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about veganism. So I think one thing we see and has been seen more popular now, and I know you're into CrossFit, which is also something I want to ask you about, is you've been seeing this this kind of sterilization of veganism and turning it into something of plant-based terminology. And I feel like it's this marketing scheme that's still, it's based on capitalism and health benefits, which is cool for health benefits. But I think what veganism originally was about was liberation-based talk. So, animal liberation, not testing, finding other ways. Can you talk about, because you've been a vegan for a long time, the differences that you've seen, especially with more products now and in that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that hit the nail on the head. I think, capitalism always takes these movements and these, communities that are working towards liberation, for veganism, like animal liberation and earth liberation, and it just strips it of all of its teeth and of the point of that movement, and it just takes it down to commodity. And that's definitely what's happened. I mean, it's great that being on tour, I'm able to find more options everywhere, but at the same time, it's lost all its or not all of it, but the mainstream version of it has no connection to, any kind of activism or any kind of push for any kind of liberation. And that's, it sucks. That's what capitalism always does. The singer Chris of Sect has like a small like vegan like cooking oil, I guess, called Vegan Magic, which is like kind of like bacon grease, like a vegan bacon grease. And he's just had, like, seeing the business side of it, he's just hated it because he's not a business person or a capitalist in any way. He's just a guy who is always kind of experimenting in the kitchen and loves like just creating stuff, and people liked it, so he went with it. But having to deal with like Whole Foods and distribution channels, it's just like ruined it for him. And
oh man, okay.
Yeah, just seeing the takeover of the vegan, local vegan shops and vegan co-ops and grocery stores being taken over by these corporate interests, and having these meat companies like buy majority shares of these like plant-based meat products is just pretty sickening. And when they're only there to extract value from anything, and that's, I guess, that's the danger in any kind of movement, is that the vultures will always be circling overhead to try to extract everything they can, and just the resistance to that.
Like how you can buy Anarchy A shirt from Walmart or something. How it
totally
it gets rolled in.
And I guess that's the genius of capitalism. That's how it sustains. It's able to kind of make people feel like they're a part of this thing, but they take the anger or the potential to actual change out of it.
Yeah, it's so adaptable because it plays into exactly how we're wired, to feel lack and to feel never content, and also into our religious myths. Like, if you're bad, you go to hell. If you're good, you go to heaven. If you're good, you're rich. If you're poor, you're bad, so you need 3 jobs. These Santa Claus myths that just wreck people, and it blames yourself, and it's so destructive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I don't think it was intentional. I don't think, there was a committee of people figuring out ways to, well, actually, maybe that's not true. I'm sure there were, like, obviously COINTELPRO was there to destroy the movements in the city that were about to change things. But I think it's kind of just, the reactionary forces reacting to things and then figuring out, in stripping this of its real value, we can make money off of it. And then how damaging that is. Like, then that gives people this outlet, like you said, to go to Walmart and get a shirt with a Circle A and feel like, okay, I'm an anarchist now, and now I'm changing things. That's fine for them. That they're okay if you're still a consumer and you're just consuming this stuff. It's when like people are actually organizing and getting together and doing things. You know, it's when people are doing mutual aid and forming, you know, these dual power systems, I guess. And, you know, when people start to realize they don't need, you know, their local government that's not doing anything for them, or this national government that's not doing anything for us. Like, mutual aid, direct action gets the goods, you know?
Yeah. No, you're so right, because going back to COINTELPRO was established as soon as there was a group of black activists who were organizing to fight capitalism and all these things. And there was assassination programs, you know, murder for attempted. And then for other things that are way worse but still capitalist, there's no COINTELPRO.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question is about how you've seen the straight edge and vegan culture change over the years. And I feel maybe some of the answer is in this, but I feel like anarchism has influenced it more, or more intersectionality approaches, because I feel like in the 90s it had some missteps, like a lot of movements where, like you mentioned, there was eco-fascist tendencies to where people were making population control arguments rather than corporate domination, or there was instances of white supremacy or a lack of analysis of systemic racism with like straight edgers, pepper spraying, drug dealers. And I really think the anarchist analysis that's been more put into now has looked at class and race and settler colonialism, but I was wondering how you've seen it change over the years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think I was lucky enough to, you know, meet the guys in Race Trader and then, you know, be a part of the band, which I think was really ahead of its time at that time in the hardcore scene, talking about, you know, colonialism and imperialism and you know, America built on white supremacy, and that just was something that wasn't as like talked about or, you know, understood at that time. There's a lot of pushback people when Race Trader was talking about that, and it, you know, it was definitely scoffed at. And also, you know, that was something important for me because in the really early days of Race Trader, we worked with the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement, who, you know, Dead Prez early on was a part of, and just like realizing like settler colonialism and colonial imperialism, and that you have to work with groups and you know, like primacy teaches us that we're here to save everyone, and we have to kind of surrender that and let other people, you know, like follow their lead. Yeah, I think there, you know, like you said, there was a lot of kind of shitty stuff in those early days, especially in straight edge. You know, kill your local drug dealer T-shirts, kind of missing the point of what's the context of that. Like, where does that come from? Is killing your local drug dealer like getting to the heart of the issue, or is there a bigger system of power in play that led to that? And I think people just weren't seeing that then, and they are now. And I think, like you said, intersectionality really got in, you know, the vegan straight edge scene, and a lot of, you know, the people especially that I knew and came up with were all anarchists to some extent, and kind of, you know, realized as time went on a lot of, you know, how their critique and their approach was lacking. And, you know, whether it's a diversity of tactics and voices and perspectives, or you know, especially in the straight. I mean, early on, my relationship to straight edge was always, and Race Trader and a lot of the friends I had who were straight edge, there was kind of always a split between straight edge and vegan straight edge, and like the vegan straight edge scene was a little more, was taking in a lot of those things into consideration. But again, you know, there was that, like you said, population control and stuff, and kind of missing the point of that's that's a shitty thing to wish for. Ted Kaczynski being kind of propped up as this hero, just kind of gross and missing the point of a lot of it. And definitely people see that now, how, damaging and fucked up that was and is. So it's definitely come a long way. And as intersectionalities has come to the forefront more, I think, the hard painting kind of came along.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And I really think like the anarchists informing people about transphobia and trans communities and trans activists really fighting back against groups, like Deep Green Resistance. That was awesome too, and like called them out on that.
Yeah, definitely.
And like with your bands, like Race Trader and Sect, I mean, I feel like they have so much range to what they do, and the lyrics. Like they talk about, you have a song about Freddie Gray, and then talking about prison, industrial complex, and Race Trader a lot, and veganism and all those. So it's just awesome works.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate being able to, do those different bands that kind of approach things in different ways and talk about those things. Because again, that's definitely for me what music has always been and what animates me, and that's what I do this for sure.
Yeah, and you said before that you said Race Trader was ahead of its time because it was talking about white privilege, white power structures a long time ago in its lyrics. And then can you talk about the significance of coming back together with the 2042 album?
Yeah, we broke up 1999 or 2000 maybe, and just felt like maybe it ran its course at the time. And I think hardcore at that time kind of shifted to this really shallow kind of aesthetic thing that I didn't care about and didn't speak to me anymore. And a lot of the political bands of the 90s went away, and it just wasn't about that anymore. The bands that were just about an aesthetic image or tough guy image were kind of the big thing at the time, and that just didn't speak to me. And then over the years, Race Trader kind of talked about it. We actually had a few practices in that time, and then it just didn't lead to anything. Either no shows that made sense came up, or I was obviously super busy. But then with the election of Trump, it just felt like, I mean, leading up to that, it was just like this nonstop barrage of shit happening, like Occupy, police brutality coming to the forefront, and a lot of that stuff, and Black Lives Matter movement. Mm-hmm. And it just felt like with Trump, it just felt like, okay, we have to say something now. Like white supremacy obviously never left and is the foundation of this system, but now it's unmasked, and it's doing it in a way where it's just saying what it's doing. It's resonating with a lot of people, and that's scary. And it like was almost a thing where politics were taken back to such a basic, like if you were anti-fascist and thought Nazis were bad, then you're right on.
Yeah.
When Trump was elected, I was just like, holy shit! Like, it's so basic, but fuck, I'll take what I can get because this is bad.
Yeah.
And I think it, obviously with all those other things really politicizing people, the election of Trump really changed or really politicized a lot of people in a big way. And I thought, I think we all thought it was really important to do something about that and to make new music. We had something to say again. It was relevant again. And that was the important thing, is we didn't want to just bring it back and do a couple of reunion shows playing these old songs, even though it did feel like they're more relevant now than they've ever been. And they were kind of talking about exactly what's happening now. But it felt like if we got to do this and make new music and say new things about the context we're in now. And we all thought that was really important. And then doing it just has been great, like leading to a lot of, great conversations and meeting really good people, doing really good things, and a whole new, generation and community in hardcore that is political and doing, exactly what we think is right, like exactly what's in our hearts. So many other people are sharing it. Like, we got to do that Black Flags Over Brooklyn that Kim Kelly put on.
Oh yeah.
It was, one of the best shows and best things I've ever been a part of and ever been able to do. It was just really inspiring. It was such an awesome show, obviously, but then seeing all the other bands and all the other people and all the tables that were up, it was just awesome.
That bill was amazing. Yeah. Dang, that's so cool. How about with like the brazen lyrics of Race Trader or Sect, can you talk about like a transformational experience you've seen with like doing that music and other doors that have opened or people's minds you've changed or just how that has proliferated?
I think the cool thing about doing those bands is I have something to show the fans of Fall Out Boy, as they get older and kind of their music tastes evolve. I feel like I'm in these other bands. There's this whole other scene, that you can plug into. Even if I'm not like advertising it in that way, I don't really go out of my way to push it on them. But just, they can look into what I'm into and see that. And I've, talked to so many kids who have gotten into politics and gotten into activism because of that, which is the coolest thing in the world. That's the whole reason I do this, and that makes it all worth it. And that, that more than anything is what fulfills me musically in my life. So yeah, it's there's just been so many connections made doing those bands and the people at the shows that, have told me that like they got into it, when they were younger because of Fall Out Boy. Because I remember being that kid with the bands I was into, whether it's, Rage Against the Machine getting me into things like on a really basic level or pushing me into deeper and deeper, paths on this journey.
That's awesome. What's your connection with hip hop? Because I see like you all have like Fall Out Boys worked with Jay-Z and Neptunes, and then when you do your drum solo, you're like mashing up Lil Uzi with Kendrick and Cannibal Corpse. Like, how does that all work for, like, how do you navigate that? Or is it just all your loves coming together in that medium?
Yeah, it's just everything I love and grew up with. It's important for me. I mean, I'm not a slow drummer really. It's kind of a thing I have to do, I guess, because the band makes me. I hate it. It's not a thing I'm super comfortable with, but it's awesome because I can make it something I want to do because I can choose, the track that I play to. And, that's really important to me. But yeah, I think I grew up, like I said, listening to Metallica was the first band I got into. And then pretty shortly after that, because, getting into like thrash metal, I got into Anthrax, who did that collab with Public Enemy. And then I got into hip hop. So I got into Public Enemy and NWA and, Paris, and then going on to Dead Prez and Poor Righteous Teachers and all that different stuff. And, it's just really cool to be able to have worked with Jay-Z or whoever, because it's this other side that is really important to the band, that super formative to everyone in the band. So I think it's always good to kind of for that band to push ourselves artistically and in directions that, maybe we don't expect, people don't expect, and just do things out of our comfort zone. But just like the way, it gives you different perspectives and different approaches to doing music. And I think that's, in any art, that's super important. You have to continually kind of reassess and reinvent why you're doing it and the ways you're doing it. And so that's something that's super important.
Yeah, and art is such a communal thing as well. And you all are from the Midwest area, right?
Yep.
Milwaukee, Chicago, and Chicago's hip hop scene, I feel like, has always been that scene that reaches out to people and networks. Like you got Common and Lupe and all the groups that are from there. And I've done work with Common, and his dad used to live out here in Denver. I was good friends with him, and it was always artists from Chicago I'm good friends with Psalm One, and they seem to be the ones that always love to collab and network.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so this is my last question, and it relates to CrossFit. Going back into your disciplines and groups you're part of, I feel like I don't do CrossFit, but I like to work out a lot, and I played basketball, and it was always a meditative thing for me. I was wondering if that relates to you, of how CrossFit is this mental game, and how this relates into other groups you were part of and in that discipline.
Yeah, totally. For me, CrossFit really spoke to me because it's such a community-based thing. It's like very similar to hardcore and like being into vegan straight edge and the community that you get from that, which is why punk and hardcore really spoke to me more than just the music. Was like this community of people I could be a part of. And CrossFit was a lot like that. I just, touring a lot, it's really easy to find a CrossFit gym and drop in anywhere, and everyone is really nice and really accepting and inclusive, despite the fact that the politics of CrossFit, obviously, and a lot of people who are into it are, not great. But, again, I think when you tear it all down, people are people, and in reality and real situations, people do care and show a good side that's really gives me a lot of hope, optimism. But anyway, it's definitely about the mental aspect of it. I think finding fitness, and CrossFit especially and specifically, it's this form of fitness that is just scary. Like you look at the workout of the day, and it's just like either you think it's too easy and then it wrecks you and destroys you, or it's just like this mountain that can't be climbed and can't be summited, and then you do it, and maybe you didn't do as good as you wanted, or maybe you did way better than you wanted, but you kind of learn, it's very basic, but it's just like you learn that there's nothing you can't do. I think that's a really important thing. Again, it's a really foundationally important thing in my life that I hope to impart on, especially like the fans of Fall Out Boy, who are these, a lot of them are alienated, like we said, and misfits and trying to find their community. Hopefully that's another thing that they can find, a community of people where, it doesn't matter what you look like or what your physical capabilities are. It's about that drive and that push, and realizing that as hard as something is, trying and failing, is almost the best part of it. Like, because you learn more in failing than you do in succeeding, and you learn that you can do it. Like, even if you failed, you've tried, and next time you'll do better. And that's the mental side of it, and like just coming up against what seems like insurmountable odds. I think especially in the context of what seems like an impossible thing that will ever be able to beat this capitalist system, or the inevitable climate catastrophe, collapse that's coming, like it helps to have something like CrossFit where, you know, you face those insurmountable things. And as hard as it seems, like, one, you don't stop, you don't give up because there's no other option, you know?
Yeah, because you hit those walls before.
Exactly. And it's such a small, like, dumb thing. It feels dumb to say that, but it's really true. And it really does, you know, every time I work out, I learn something new. And there, you know, it is very meditative, like you said. And, you know, even though it's a different kind of meditation, like, although afterwards I do a thing called Ramwad, which is like a yoga kind of thing for CrossFitters. That's just really about, you know, it's, you know, very stretch based yoga, but it's about the meditative aspect of it, the breathing. And those are all things, that mindfulness, that I think is really important for people to, you know, anchor ourselves in a world that's so chaotic. And that's just one piece of, I mean, I think it's, the world we live in is difficult for most people because no one feels like they have agency over their life. I mean, we don't. Like, we're in a context like this, and we're seeing all the agency being stolen away. You know, $2-3 trillion bailout for these big banks and corporations, you know, free of charge. Meanwhile, you know, people just want to be able to, like, have some type of health care, and they'll never get it because, you know, they can give free money that they just, you know, print out of nowhere for these corporations that have no oversight, but, like, people can't get any help. And then, you know, you see, like we've, you know, been saying this whole conversation in mutual aid, that we have a lot of power and we have a lot of agency. And one place for me that, you know, in my darkest times, when I got into CrossFit, I was going through a really dark time. Fall Out Boy went on hiatus. It seemed like we were probably going to break up. Our friendships were really strained. We weren't really talking. And, you know, it's a band I've been doing at this point, most of my life. Yeah. And they're, you know, they're my family. It was really difficult. And being in a situation where, you know, we tour so much, there's kind of a institutionalization to that. You know, this quarantine's been really hard too, because my schedule's been completely upended. You know, I don't know when I'm going to tour next. And, you know, not only is it like my job, but it is this thing I love. And it is this thing that it's, you know, in the last 20 years of my life, it's the only thing I've known. And I don't know when I can do it again. And that's a difficult thing. And I was going through that, you know, when I got into CrossFit, and CrossFit was this thing that really gave me agency back, I guess. And, you know, all the things I just said, like this mental aspect and this meditative aspect to kind of ground me again and anchor me in a world that's really crazy. Yeah. I that's what's been so important about it to me.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. And
yeah, totally.
Well, thanks again, Andy.
Yeah,
thank
you.
you taking the time. And this is the song "You Two Will Scatter" by Sect from their album "Blood of the Beasts."
We are
This is the song By the Time I Get to Pennsylvania by Race Trader from their album 2042. Thank you all for tuning in. Please check out what Andy Hurley is up to on his website, hurleyxvx.com. He's a CrossFit trainer, coffee fanatic, comic lover, legendary drummer, and all-around good guy. Check the show notes for Chris from Sex Vegan Cooking Oil, link called Vegan Magic. Big thanks to Awareness for the music. Be safe and healthy, everyone. Please share the show around and hit me up about any show ideas at time@dirtylaboratory.com.